A cloud descends over all of them.
They're hit with a cosmic storm that changes their DNA to possess certain powers.
That's gross.
They did it. Those crazy sons of bitches actually did it. Some 27 years after the 1-2 punch of Blade and X-Men propelled us into the Marvel age of movies, we finally have an adaptation of Marvel's first family that is undeniably fantastic.
Say that again?
But as impressive as a feat as Matt Shakman and Kevin Feige have pulled off with the Fantastic Four First Steps, what if I told you it isn't the first time someone has managed to make Marvel's original super team work on the silver screen? No, I'm not talking about The Incredibles, great as they are. I'm talking about those two Fantastic Four films from the mid to late 2000s. You know, the ones with Chris Evans, Jessica Alba, and the bald guy from The Shield. Love you, Michael Chiklis. What if I said those movies weren't actually the catastrophic failures they're often remembered as? What if, and hear me out for a second here, what if they're actually kinda alright? It's a bold statement, I know. Never before has a 20-something video essayist gone online to offer lukewarm praise of an otherwise maligned franchise from his childhood. It's downright unprecedented.
It's false. Not this time. We got you.
But all jokes aside, I fully recognize I'm somewhat incapable of talking about these films with complete objectivity, even if arts and film is a subjective medium. After all, they're what made me a fan of the Fantastic Four in the first place. When I was a kid, I got the Fantastic Four DVD as a birthday gift. It was a right place, right time situation where my age plus the sentimentality of a gifted object made this movie a staple for me. I watched it over and over again, and I loved it. It is just such a good time, dude, especially when you're like, you know, a middle schooler or something. Is it the most complex movie? No. Did I relate to any of the characters at the wee age of 11 or 12? Definitely not. But you know what? It feels good. It's a fun time, and I admired how it embraced the characters and soul from which everything came. Long before I ever picked up a comic book, this was my Fantastic Four, and that first impression, no matter how imperfect, has shaped my preferences when it comes to these characters, for better and for worse. They'll always be my first point of reference whenever a new incarnation of this franchise comes around. So it'd be absurd of me to try and convince you that my willingness to look past their many, many flaws is totally unbiased. I fully admit I have a soft spot for them. However, I do think there's more to my fondness than just pure nostalgia. Even as I've gotten older and learned how to view these movies through a more critical lens, I can't help but be charmed by them. And I don't think it's entirely fair to suggest they aren't earning that reaction on some level. And you know what? I have eventually started relating to the characters a bit more, especially Reed. Are they underwritten, often having characters directly state how they're feeling just in case the subtleties of the performances elude us? Without a doubt. Are they extremely of their time? Of course. I don't think a movie has ever looked or felt more 2005 than the original Fantastic Four does, except for the ABC Family commercial teasing Batman Begins.
Does it come in black?
He fights for family and lives for love.
Yeah, that's pretty odds. And like so many comic book films of that era, do they take some pretty massive liberties with the source material? You bet your ass they do. Lest we forget the cosmic storm cloud formerly known as Galactus, or Dr. Doom, who's essentially a completely different character from his comic book counterpart. More precisely, he's just Norman Osborn, right down to the almost line-for-line recreation of the boardroom sequence from Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man.
Do you know how much money I've invested in this company?
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
Yet, flawed as they may be, something about this iteration of Marvel's first family resonates with me. I'm drawn to it, even though I realize it's lacking in ways that I probably wouldn't be able to tolerate in other comic book movies. So now, on the 20th anniversary of their debut, if you can believe that, I think it's high time I unpacked what exactly it is about Tim Story's Fantastic Four duology that I find so goddamn endearing.
We're the Fantastic Four, man. That was pretty cool.
To get to the bottom of this, we must first figure out how we've ended up with these films in the first place, and to do that, I've enlisted the help of someone who knows far more about this sort of thing than I ever could. My good friend Owen from Owen Likes Comics.
Now, a couple of years ago, they made a Fantastic Four movie, very low budget.
Yeah.
It never really saw the light of day.
It wasn't supposed to. That movie was made just so that somebody wouldn't lose the rights to make the real movie later.
They had an option on the property.
Yeah, he would have lost his option if he didn't begin principal photography by a certain date.
To understand what makes Tim Story's Fantastic Four films so memorable, it's important to view them in context and look at the near 20-year history of Hollywood trying to bring these iconic superheroes to the big screen. The Fantastic Four aren't just one of the most beloved teams in the Marvel Universe, but one of the company's most important creations. Brought to life by the iconic duo of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1961, the Fantastic Four represented Marvel's resurgence after a decade in the superhero wilderness. The title's initial success didn't just catapult Reed, Sue, Ben, and Johnny into the hearts and minds of a generation of fans, but it completely revitalized this floundering company, allowing Lee and Kirby to introduce a slew of now beloved characters in their aftermath. Because of this, the Fantastic Four have always remained a cornerstone of Marvel's storytelling and larger universe, and as such, when it came to Hollywood looking to bring the company's roster to the big screen, their first family seemed like a no-brainer. In 1986, the team's film rights were acquired by German producer Bernd Eichinger. This deal granted him and Constantine Films a 5-year window to make a live-action film based on the property, with Marvel regaining the right if a Fantastic Four movie wasn't in production by the end of 1992. Over the next 5 years, Eichinger tried and failed to bring this team to life, with numerous studios passing on the project due to concerns over its necessary budget. With Eichinger set to lose the film rights to the characters, he eventually struck a deal with legendary B-movie producer Roger Corman in 1992 that would see a low-budget version of the movie be shot with an estimated cost of just $1 million. Now, while much of the cast and crew believed this was a genuine attempt to bring these superheroes to the big screen, Eichinger used it to effectively renegotiate his rights agreement with Marvel, and after a new agreement was put in place, the Corman-produced film was scrapped, and Eichinger struck a deal with 20th Century Fox that would see director Chris Columbus, then best known for his work on Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire, agree in 1994 to helm a $40 million adaptation of Marvel's First Family. Columbus spent much of the 1990s trying to bring this film to life, hiring numerous screenwriters including Michael Chabon, Michael France, and even Batman 1989 writer Sam Hamm, all to no avail. Despite concept artist Tim Flattery being hired to sketch designs for the 4 main characters and the film's antagonist Dr. Doom, Columbus would eventually step back as director and instead serve as the movie's producer by the end of the decade.
The Fantastic Four experience was terrible because we got fired from the movie. As we left that meeting, we both got a call from the studio saying, we don't need your involvement anymore, we're going to give you an executive producer credit.
With a slew of other filmmakers like Peter Segal and Roger Gosnell trying and failing to bring these characters to life. By the start of the new millennium, Fox's efforts to make a Fantastic Four movie hadn't paid off. This is despite the start of a new superhero boom in Hollywood, with recent successes like 1998's Blade and Fox's own X-Men in 2000 showcasing that these characters could be adapted successfully. Although Blade and X-Men both stripped away some of their comic counterparts' more campy and fantastical elements, it would be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film in 2002 that served as an effective template for the Fantastic Four. The same year Peter Parker swung onto the big screen, Peyton Reed took over as Fantastic Four director, pitching a 1960s period piece in the style of A Hard Day's Night alongside screenwriter Douglas Petrie. While Reed and Petrie's version of the film didn't materialize, their successors Tim Story and Mark Frost did carry over some ideas from their screenplay, and sought to craft an origin story that essentially bridged the gap between Bryan Singer's X-Men and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Tim Story was something of an unlikely choice for director. His best-known works up until this point were the action comedy films Barbershop and Taxi. However, despite any potential inexperience he had with big-budget movies, he displayed a keen ability to balance interpersonal stories, romance, and familial drama, qualities that Fox executives saw as essential for the Fantastic Four. Speaking with Wizard magazine in July of 2004, Tim Story opened up about his process of bringing these characters to life, emphasizing the importance of the group's often dysfunctional but never faltering family dynamic, stating that, "It's one of those things I never thought in a million years I would get a shot to do. What's cool about the Fantastic Four is they don't technically want to be where they are. They've just taken the responsibility and they deal with it. They have arguments, they run out of milk, and they like to watch TV just like we do. I love situations where a group that has to be together sometimes doesn't want to be together, but they'll defend each other to the death if an external situation comes up that threatens them." In addition to Story signing on to direct, Petrie's script was reworked by Mark Frost, with the film's cast being finally confirmed in the summer of 2004. As such, after 20 years of development and countless bold and unique pitches to bring these seminal heroes to the big screen, Fantastic Four finally premiered worldwide in July of 2005, grossing over $330 million and spawning a 2007 sequel, Rise of the Silver Surfer.
Needless to say, it was an uphill battle getting Fantastic Four off the ground, but unfortunately, the struggle didn't end on opening night, because despite an impressive theatrical run finishing as the 11th highest grossing film of 2005, only 2 spots behind Batman Begins, if you can believe that, just to give you a little perspective on how big this thing was, I'd be hard-pressed to call this first film an unmitigated success. Tim Story had done what so many before him had tried and failed to do. He'd turned Fantastic Four into a blockbuster franchise. But not everyone was as impressed as the suits at 20th Century Fox. Audiences and critics weren't kind to the film. Reviews at the time compared it unfavorably to its genre contemporaries and largely wrote it off as mindless children's entertainment. And would it shock you to learn that Rise of the Silver Surfer didn't fare much better 2 years later? Critical darlings, these films were not. But I'll be honest, even as someone who can admit these movies are deeply flawed, I still can't wrap my head around why the hate was so unanimous and so mean-spirited. I mean, let's just compare the reception these films received to that of Fox's other big superhero franchise at the time, the X-Men. Helmed by now disgraced director Bryan Singer, those original X-Men films were just as guilty of many of the same sins as Fantastic Four, from their aggressively Y2K aesthetic to their frequent disregard for their source material, yet those first 2 X-Men films, more or less, got a pass. And sure, yeah, they're undeniably better written movies than either of Tim Story's Fantastic Four films, but not so much so as to explain the sheer chasm between how each was received. So what gives? Well, if I had to take an educated guess, it all comes down to tone. We may roll our eyes at Bryan Singer's grounded, self-serious approach to the X-Men now, but at the time, it's what gave those films mainstream appeal. When general audiences sat down to watch X-Men or X2, they weren't presented with a Saturday morning cartoon come to life, replete with all the colorful costumes, esoteric lore, and far-flung sci-fi concepts you'd expect from these kinds of movies today. Instead, they got moody action dramas ostensibly made for adults, or at the very least made in the style that was acceptable for an adult audience to be seen enjoying. Because, at the time, that was how you got a mass audience to give this material a chance. The superhero genre was not yet mainstream outside of the big hitters, and even then, things were looking pretty bleak. By the end of the millennium, Batman and Superman were seen as cinematic dead ends, primarily because of how over-the-top their films had become. Hot on the heels of 90s irony, a fantastical take on the genre wasn't seen as a viable approach. You had to make it look like you were taking things seriously, and that meant no whimsy. And so X-Men wisely modulated the material to better suit the cinematic sensibilities of the time. Tim Story's Fantastic Four movies, on the other hand, are the exact opposite in almost every respect. They're borderline live-action cartoons full of heightened characters, broad slapstick comedy, and cheesy sentiment. In an interview with Variety, Tim Story himself said, "We tried to do something different than the brooding, dark setting you usually get in superhero films. The key to that movie was how to play with the comedic tone and the action and have it feel respectable to the genre and the franchise and still be fun." And while that approach very much suits the Fantastic Four, for audiences in the mid-2000s, it was probably a bit too silly. With the exception of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films, which had the benefit of being helmed by an experienced genre filmmaker who'd perfected the art of giving whimsical fantasy and aching sincerity a sense of verisimilitude, the superhero du jour was realism, and Fantastic Four barely even attempted it. As a result, to many, it came across as little more than flashy children's entertainment. And although this isn't an entirely unwarranted characterization of these movies, after all, they aren't exactly a deep, meaningful meditation on the source material or its 4 lead characters, I'd argue it's still a tad reductive. They may not be the most substantive superhero films ever made, but as an adaptation of the Fantastic Four, they get most of the important stuff right, namely the team itself. Post 9/11 American culture might have been a world away from the mid-century space-age optimism that forged the Fantastic Four, but Tim Story manages to translate these iconic heroes into a contemporary context without diluting the core characteristics that define them. He evidently recognized that the heart of the team and what makes them stand apart from other superheroes is the dysfunctional family dynamic between Reed Richards, Ben Grimm, and Sue and Johnny Storm, because he leans into it hard. Despite a number of standout set pieces, particularly in Rise of the Silver Surfer, both entries are far less action-oriented than you might expect from a superhero blockbuster. They instead function like family films, in the most literal sense possible. That is, they're movies about a family designed to be enjoyed by the whole family. The consensus opinion on Fantastic Four 2005 is that it's just a protracted origin story, with the super team aspect not really coalescing until the third act. Far too late for most people's tastes. But I'd argue it's the film's greatest strength. The Fantastic Four have always been scientists first, superheroes second, and although both of Story's films omits the cosmic adventures that are so integral to the comics, they nevertheless emphasize the team's scientific prowess. The first film is primarily about 4 astronauts, 5 if you want to count Victor, conducting a series of experiments to test the limits of their newfound abilities that present as an external manifestation of their personal insecurities. In developing their understanding of their powers, they also learn to better understand the insecurities they represent, until eventually they're able to overcome them, resisting their more self-defeating impulses to emerge as more well-rounded versions of themselves. It's an extremely basic story, but it effectively capitalizes on what makes the Fantastic Four such a special team: their humanity. By hinging the plot entirely on the characters' efforts to understand their powers, we get to spend a lot of time getting to know these characters as people. Rise of the Silver Surfer takes full advantage of the foundation set by its predecessor, placing even greater focus on the interpersonal relationships within the team. Adapted from one of the most ambitious Fantastic Four adventures Stan Lee and Jack Kirby ever collaborated on, 1966's 3-issue Galactus trilogy, the story tests the ties that bind our 4 heroes in organic and compelling ways, showing how their new role as celebrity heroes has placed a strain on their ability to live their lives the way they want to live them, challenging the cohesion of the family unit we saw calcify in the previous entry. Again, it's nothing profound or groundbreaking, but it imbues both of these films with a ton of heart, which goes an awful long way towards making up for any narrative or adaptational shortcomings. I'd hesitate to call them character pieces, but it's very clear that Story and the lead writer of both films, Mark Frost, recognized that the single most important aspect of the Fantastic Four was the characters, and so wisely made them their top priority. This emphasis on character is further strengthened by absolutely impeccable casting. Ioan Gruffudd and Michael Chiklis are generational picks for Reed and Ben, respectively, while Chris Evans and Jessica Alba each capture the essence of Johnny and Sue in spite of the sometimes narrow characterization afforded to them by the scripts. Is there more to the Storms than either actor got a chance to explore? Yeah, no doubt, but both performances still manage to get at the core of what makes these characters tick, in no small part thanks to how well both of these actors evidently understood their characters. Hell, even the late, great Julian McMahon shines as Victor Von Doom. While it's fair to say Doom is the one character Story and Frost never got quite right, McMahon's performance hews as close to the spirit of the comic book character as the script will allow. He may not be the autocratic tech wizard Lee and Kirby originally dreamed up, but this reimagined Doom retains a number of his namesake's key traits, namely his intense vanity, his petty elitism, and his bitter contempt for one Reed Richards, all of which McMahon embodies with suitably grandiose panache. I mean, he's making an absolute meal out of scraps, and one wonders what an actor of his talents might have done with a version of the character that more resembled the Latvian dictator of the comics, but it sadly wasn't meant to be. With that being said though, I don't hate his take on Doom by any means. Yeah, the sinister CEO thing isn't quite as compelling as being the monarch of a small Eastern European nation, but I can see the vision. I mean, what is a CEO but a modern-day tyrant? And let me tell you, portraying Victor Von Doom as a lecherous aerospace exec who covets the genius of those working under him hits a bit differently in 2025.
You're a supervillain. That's what a supervillain does.
I also think the decision to take a page from the Ultimate Comics and fold Doom's origin into the Fantastic Fours makes a lot of sense here. Doom's original comic book origins are much more compelling, to be sure, but they're also exceedingly complex, slowly taking place over many years and blending science and mysticism in a way even most modern comic book movies wouldn't dare touch. As such, it's probably not something you could satisfyingly fit into a film already juggling 4 other lead characters. I suppose the filmmakers could have just had Doom be fully formed from the onset, but that still would have required a lot of explaining, which likely would have made Doom feel like even more of an afterthought than he already does in the version we got. So I get why they went this route. By having Victor gain his powers on the same mission as the Fantastic Four, you get to establish what Reed and Victor's relationship was like before superpowers were thrown into the mix, while retaining Reed's involvement in the accident that set Doom down the path of villainy. And with the added bonus of getting to show it playing out in tandem with the team's origins, friends, rather than simply having to allude to this shared history. Unfortunately, the powers he gains while out in space kinda suck ass. I mean, look, I'll forgive these movies for a lot, but there's just no excusing how lame Doom's powers are here, especially when compared with his comic book counterpart's mastery of magic. I'm not even entirely sure what his powers actually are supposed to be here. I mean, I guess they're electromagnetic? Like, I'm pretty sure that's just lightning shooting out of his hands, Palpatine style.
I've always wanted power. Now I have an unlimited supply.
But also, his skin is turning into metal, at least until the next film, when it's suddenly not, despite the fact that he keeps his powers after his run-in with the Silver Surfer. Doom's abilities are never fully defined the way they are for the four, probably because they're little more than a clumsy workaround for his comic book powers. And sadly, Doom's technological prowess is also lacking in both films. The most he ever builds is a gauntlet designed to take control of the Surfer's board, which is cool, but not exactly Doombots. Victor's genius-level intellect is downplayed in general, particularly in the first film. You get the sense he's an intelligent man, able to keep up with Reed's technobabble and drop the occasional bit of jargon, but it never really gets demonstrated in a meaningful way. The closest we get to an outright display of his supposed brilliance is in Rise of the Silver Surfer, when he helps the Fantastic Four locate and neutralize said Surfer. Doom leverages his encounter with the Chrome Interloper to weasel his way into the US military's good graces so that he can advise the team's ongoing operation, much to Reed's chagrin. And it's this aspect of Doom's intelligence, his intellectual rivalry with Mr. Fantastic, that these films get most right. From their very first scene together, it's abundantly clear that Victor is driven by a deep-seated need to prove his greatness. I mean, the film literally opens on a 30-foot statue of the man towering over all who dare to enter his domain. The dude is obviously compensating for something, and when he and Reed are reunited moments later, it immediately becomes apparent what that something is: Reed's supposed intellectual superiority. Though the two men seemingly haven't seen one another since their days at MIT, Doom is quick to try and assert his dominance, belittling his old friend while lauding his wealth and status over him. He relishes the fact that
The great Reed Richards asked me for help.
But his antagonism belies deep insecurity. Despite everything Victor has achieved, the empire he's built, he's still hung up on whether he's smarter than his old college frenemy, because deep down, he suspects he isn't, and that suspicion consumes him. Victor's entire life is seemingly geared around one-upping Reed. In addition to potentially sabotaging he and Ben's partnership with NASA, bankrupting the pair, and ensuring they'd have no one to turn to but him, Doom goes so far as to hire Reed's ex, Sue Storm, in the hopes of eventually pursuing an intimate relationship with her. It's unclear whether Doom's romantic interest in Sue is genuine or just another desperate bid to best Reed, but based on the demeaning way he treats her in just about every interaction, I'm willing to bet it's the former. I mean, even his rushed proposal plays like a thinly veiled attempt to get a rise out of Reed. I mean, even the fact that he frames that as a promotion to Sue speaks volumes about his intentions behind the whole thing. Like, you're telling me Victor didn't make a move until Reed was conveniently back in the picture, and then does so in the middle of a mission, despite the fact he and Sue haven't been dating? I mean, please be for real. Everything Doom does in these films, he does to undermine the one man on Earth who makes him feel inferior, and that's Reed. But this rivalry is more or less a one-sided affair, at least in the first film. Not because Reed is oblivious of Doom's resentment or determined to be the bigger man, rather he's simply too meek to confront him. If Victor Von Doom is the jealous bully, then Reed Richards is the spineless nerd, unwilling to assert himself. Although this isn't a totally unprecedented approach to Mr. Fantastic, it isn't necessarily the most obvious way to adapt him either. Sure, Reed's a nerd, he's the smartest man in the world after all, someone who often gets so wrapped up in the theoretical that he neglects reality. But that in and of itself doesn't make him a dweeb. In fact, I've seen a lot of fans dismiss this version for turning the character into a one-note caricature of a smart person. Ooh, smart wimpy man and all that. But to the contrary, the decision to characterize Reed in this way is actually a lot cannier than it initially seems. Although he's been a persistent presence in comics for decades, Reed Richards is by far the most of his original era aspect of the Fantastic Four. more. If the titular team constitutes a makeshift nuclear family, then Reed is the archetypical patriarch, a role he's never quite been able to break free of. So many of the character's core traits can be traced back to this identity, from his position as the team's de facto leader to his occasionally patronizing father-knows-best paternalism. Reed may have made it out of the 60s, but the 60s never truly made it out of Reed. And while there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, in fact, it can and has been used to tell interesting and subversive stories about the inherent tension between the character's unconventional identities and their extremely conventional family structure, it also makes it extremely easy for Reed to feel out of step with modern sensibilities. While later adaptations like First Steps have elected to embrace this aspect of the character, rooting him in the era that created him, Tim Story's Fantastic Four films didn't have that luxury. Both movies place Reed in a strikingly contemporary setting, meaning Story and Frost had to make Mr. Fantastic's core personality traits make sense outside the cultural context that originally informed them. They go about doing this by placing a greater emphasis on the character's social awkwardness. Like his comic book counterpart, Ioan Gruffudd's Reed Richards is a brilliant but somewhat aloof genius. However, this absent-mindedness isn't the byproduct of a culture that encouraged men to be emotionally distant and self-interested. It's the new millennium, after all. Men may still be taught they're the center of the world, but they aren't expected to be quite so repressed. Instead, we're shown he's this way because he's a nerd, someone with limited social awareness who's generally uncomfortable expressing himself, but is usually able to get by on his intellect, with the notable exception being in his interpersonal relationships, which frequently suffer because he's either too preoccupied with other thoughts or too emotionally inept to express his feelings. Reed's relationship with Sue is kind of the perfect microcosm of this. Their initial relationship fell apart because Reed couldn't see what was right in front of him. He didn't pick up on the signals Sue was sending, and as a result, she grew tired of always feeling like a secondary consideration and dumped his ass.
Reed's always right. Good thing he doesn't always know what he's got.
Similarly, Reed's more timid demeanor makes him incapable of standing up to his old pal Victor. It's clear from their first encounter that Reed sees Doom for the vain egomaniac he is, yet he doesn't say anything, allowing the callous billionaire to just walk all over him.
Victor's not that bad. He's just a little larger than life.
It's this lack of a backbone, for lack of a better term, that makes his friendship with Ben all the more endearing, because it's immediately clear why these two became so tight. Reed has the vision, while Ben has the grit that Reed lacks. Right off the bat, Ben goes on the offense when it becomes evident that Victor's fucking with them. He's only reeled in when Reed's other defining trait rears its head: his ego. Reed might be a little feckless at times, but he isn't a fool. He knows damn well Doom's intentions are malicious, but he also knows a partnership represents the only avenue to continuing his research, and so he pumps the brakes on the only person calling it as it is. In other words, Reed's ego takes the wheel. Achieving his goal is more important than considering the potential fallout, and it leads to the creation of the team's most enduring foe. This egotism is Reed's most persistent character flaw across both films. Whether he's overestimating his ability to balance his scientific work with his interpersonal relationships, or allowing Doom to goad him into a partnership that everyone, himself included, thinks is a bad idea, the exact thing Doom is counting on him to do, Reed's pride is consistently his undoing.
I'll try to talk slowly, so you can keep up.
Luckily for Reed, Jessica Alba's Sue Storm is usually there to rein in this impulse. Not unlike her husband, Sue's a character that's easy to make feel dated. Although her comic book counterpart has grown into a more assertive character over the years, most still see her as the demure eye candy of the team. And I'll be honest, this incarnation is a big part of why the view of her persists to this day. Not because the character is poorly written per se, or because Jessica Alba didn't understand the character or play her well enough, but rather because it's clear the filmmakers, specifically Tim Story and Avi Arad, saw the character as a sex symbol first and foremost. I mean, you don't scold your lead actress for making an emotional beat feel too painful and real before instructing her to quote-unquote cry pretty unless on some level you see the character little more than a pretty face. Nor do you repeatedly contrive scenarios in which she has to get naked to use her powers. I think Tim Story deserves a lot of praise for the amount of heart he put into these films, but his approach to Sue Storm is a glaring exception. That said, Jessica Alba still manages to take what worked about Sue on the page and craft an interpretation of the character that's far more compelling than the director's limited vision for her. As is the case in other iterations of the Fantastic Four, Sue is the beating heart of the family, holding everything together while seldom getting the recognition she deserves for it, not unlike the actress playing her. And nowhere is this more clearly demonstrated than in her relationship with Reed. I'm fully aware that for many fans of the character, the fact that Sue spends most of both Fantastic Four and Rise of the Silver Surfer preoccupied with her love life is frustrating. Sue's no stranger to writers who don't know what to do with her besides cast her in the traditional wife or mother role, and so it's disappointing that she spends so much of her cinematic debut fretting over Mr. Fantastic. But I think judging Sue's narrative role in both of these films in the macro like this does it a bit of a disservice. Because when you examine the specifics of her parts, it becomes clear that she isn't just there to serve Reed's arc. Sure, she does do that, but only by learning to finally make her own needs known. From her introduction, it's evident this version of Sue struggles with her self-worth. Despite being a brilliant scientist in her own right, she works for a man who seemingly only keeps her around because he wants to get under her ex's skin. A situation you get the impression she's only tolerating because she also wants to get under Reed's skin as payback for the way he treated her. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend this motivation gives her a ton more agency than your typical superhero love interest, but it does add some dimension to what is otherwise a standard lovers reunited story. Sue and Reed's original relationship only ended because Sue got sick of waiting for Reed to appreciate what was right in front of him. So, on some level, it makes sense that she would go and do something to make him jealous because she's hoping it might at least elicit some kind of reaction.
Did you feel anything when I left? Do you feel anything right now?
It's on the nose, but Sue feels invisible to those around her, especially Reed. However, part of the problem is that she often allows herself to become invisible. When Reed fails to grasp the significance of moving in together and overanalyzes what Sue thinks ought to be a simple matter of the heart, she leaves him. While well within her rights, this disappearing act doesn't solve the root of the issue. It doesn't actually communicate her desires the way she thinks it does. It just resigns her to a life without the thing she actually wants, a life with Reed. Similarly, when Victor proposes on the bridge of the space station, essentially making his true motivations for her known, she keeps her feelings of rage to herself, bottled up, invisible. It's only by learning to be comfortable expressing her thoughts and feelings as opposed to passively waiting for others to pick up on them that Sue finally gets what she's been waiting for this whole time. There's a terrific scene in the extended cut of the first movie, which, if you haven't seen it before, is hands down the definitive version of the film, where Sue and Reed visit a planetarium as part of their impromptu date night. While sitting under the stars, reminiscing about their first date there, Reed confesses that he knew moving in together wasn't actually as complicated as he made it out to be, and that he was simply afraid he couldn't be the kind of man Sue wanted.
You always talked about how you liked the kind of man who could approach you, speak his mind. One who wasn't afraid to tell you exactly what he wanted.
When Sue tells Reed she wanted him to be that man for her, he asks why she didn't just say that, to which she replies,
I'm saying it now.
On top of just being a cute little moment, this scene perfectly encapsulates how much Sue grows over the course of her time at the Baxter Building. During their original courtship, Sue explicitly told Reed the kind of man she needed him to be, but she did it without indicating what she wanted him to do with that information. So, instead of taking it on board, Reed fixated on the numerous ways he failed to live up to her standards and the relationship stalled. She was putting her desires out there, but inadvertently made them feel unattainable, intangible, so to speak. But upon being forced to spend time with Reed again, she starts to understand why her expressed needs fell on deaf ears, and so she revises her tack. Ironically, she has to become the kind of person she wants Reed to be, the kind of person who speaks their mind and isn't afraid to tell someone what they want. Rise of the Silver Surfer continues this thread, with Sue growing increasingly frustrated with Reed's regression into a partner who doesn't make time for her. What's more, the virtual panopticon the family have found themselves living in since becoming superheroes is starting to take a toll on her. Just as a quick aside, I absolutely adore the way these movies adapt the fact that the Fantastic Four are more akin to celebrities than your typical superheroes. They may be a product of the 60s, but I honestly can't think of a more fitting era to explore this idea than the mid to late 2000s, aka the zenith of American celebrity culture. Sue Storm crashing out over the paparazzi's incessant badgering while she prepares for her wedding feels like something ripped straight from the cover of Us magazine. But anyway, what I've always appreciated about Rise of the Silver Surfer is that it doesn't drag this Sue and Reed conflict out for too long. The film rightfully recognizes it's a problem this couple have dealt with once before, and so it doesn't take long for the two of them to hash it out and make the decision to scale back their superhero wing so that they can focus on starting a family. It's a testament to how much these two characters have grown together and makes room for the film to explore Sue's unexpected friendship with the Silver Surfer. Earlier, I described Sue as the beating heart of the film, and I wasn't exaggerating. Across both films, she is consistently shown to be the glue holding this heterodox family together. Sue's the only one stern enough to get through to Johnny when his smartass antics go a little too far, and empathetic enough to have a heart-to-heart with Ben when he's frustrated. But perhaps the best example of Sue's innate ability to connect with others is her rapport with Norrin Radd, the Silver Surfer. While I love Fantastic Four 2005 and Rise of the Silver Surfer, I think I prefer a lot of the ideas and tonal impulses that Tim Story was going for in the sequel. And a not insignificant part of the reason why is the way it handles the Surfer himself. The design is legitimately perfect. Doug Jones' physicality coupled with Lawrence Fishburne's vocal performance is unmatched. It may legitimately be the best page-to-screen adaptation of a comic book character ever attempted, and the effect still holds up thanks to a healthy marriage of practical and digital effects work. But my love of this character isn't limited to his appearance, and while I'd love to go on and talk about how much I love the Silver Surfer, I think there's another person out there who loves the Silver Surfer a bit more than me, and so it's time to pass it over to Superframe to talk a bit about why the Silver Surfer fucking rules in this movie.
I love the Silver Surfer. I love everything about why Jack created Galactus and the Herald, but we'll get to that soon. Now, for a movie called Rise of the Silver Surfer, Norrin Radd, the Silver Surfer, doesn't speak all that much, but he doesn't have to. Look, his story is one of sacrifice, of compromise. As we find out, he gave up everything, his name, his body, his planet, his love, to serve a god that devours worlds, and all for one reason, to save someone he loved. Which is kind of interesting, right? Because when you look at where Reed and Sue are in the movie, caught in the tug-of-war between saving the world and just trying to be together, it's not hard to see the mirror that Norrin holds up to them. Reed buries himself in equations, in logic, in distraction. Sue wants something more human, something normal. A wedding, a honeymoon, a life, but they can't have normal. None of them can. And that's the point. It's not about fitting into the mold of a regular family. It's about redefining what a family can be when the world expects you to be anything but, to be fantastic. And get this, it's the loneliest man in the universe, Norrin, who makes them see that. There's a scene where he penetrates through one of Sue's force fields, and it's subtle, but powerful. Now, that barrier is not just physical, it's emotional. It's Sue's need for control, for safety, and Norrin, just with a touch, can pierce it. Not through aggression, but just through presence. These two share a beat together before the general and his lackeys have their way, but later, we discover that the beat here was a look of understanding, a shared burden. You see, Norrin gets it as well. He understands Sue. We find out through his PowerPoint presentation abs that he knows what it's like to carry the weight of love across impossible odds. Now, if you really want to get esoteric about it all of this extends to the very point of the Silver Surfer in the first place. He's been called Christ on a surfboard. And what is Christ known for, if not bearing the burden of others, understanding our pain and laying down his life so we can live? Heck, he even beat Galactus by hitting a T-pose. Alright, Tim Story, see what you're doing there? Now, the religious undertones of the character aren't a mistake. Jack, the King Kirby, didn't just create Galactus and the Silver Surfer as another villain and sidekick, he looked to the Bible.
For some reason, I went to the Bible.
He looked to myth, to say something important.
They were above mythic figures.
Galactus, in Kirby's words, wasn't evil, he was above good and evil. He was judgment, he was God.
I came up with Galactus.
And the Surfer? That was the hand of God. Like Christ, he bore his world's burden. He sacrificed himself, initially to just save his world, but then every world, once he turns on the God.
And of course, the Silver Surfer is a fallen angel.
In the comics, the Surfer is known as a being of sorrow, of reflection, and heck, rightfully so. The guy has the death of trillions on his hands. The type of shit that this guy must deal with is grander than grand. It's theological, yet at the same time, somehow personal. In the comics and in the movie too, he reclaims his soul. He chooses to save a world that was never his. It's this paradoxical juxtaposition of grandeur and personal angst that hits right at home with the FF. Look, the paradox of the Fantastic Four is that they're the most human team in Marvel, and they're always surrounded somehow by the most cosmic stakes. But that's why they work. Because at the center of all the grandeur, the negative zone or time-traveling pharaohs, it's still about people trying to hold each other close in a world that keeps pulling them apart. Galactus may be a cloud, but that shadow he casts is still very real. Do you guys see what I did there? Because he's a cloud. Anyway, despite this franchise's weird fascination with making Jessica Alba nude twice, botching Dr. Doom for the third time, rest in peace, Julian, and giving us this beautiful I still think somewhere in this film is a beating heart, and to me, it lies here.
I will no longer serve. This is the end for us both.
Almost immediately, Sue feels a sense of kinship with the Surfer, which prompts her to stand up for him in the face of intense scrutiny by the military and her own teammates. And Sue isn't the only member of the team getting in their feels, as essentially the children of the Fantastic Four, Johnny and Ben, are more ruled by their emotions than either Reed or Sue. This version of Johnny might not have a lot on his mind, but he makes up for it by feeling more deeply. He's impulsive and impressionable, and despite a too-cool-for-school demeanor, he cares deeply about the family he's become a part of, spending most of the second film fretting over the apparent splintering of the group, while ruminating on his desire to find a meaningful relationship like those enjoyed by his peers. Likewise, Ben is an extremely emotional being. He may be made out of stone, but he's all soft inside, acutely aware of how people perceive him and despondent over the fact his rough exterior doesn't reflect who he feels he truly is. Ironically though, this insecurity is ultimately what pushes him into the loving arms of Alicia Masters, who, as a blind person, can only see Ben for who he is on the inside. I could seriously sit here all day waxing poetic about everything I love about this iteration of these two characters, especially Michael Chiklis's Ben Grimm, but why do that when I can enlist the help of someone even more qualified to do so?
Hey, it's old Uncle High Cuck Fuck Films here. I remember the first time I watched the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies. Imagine that, having Story as a last name, just like me, my legal name being High Fuckle Bartholomew Films. Anyways, I remember being a kid and my dad got me a bootleg DVD off the street for the first film. And it was back in the day when cam rips would have literal dudes stand up to go pee and be in the middle of the frame. Good times. And I also remember fully believing that these were set in the same sincere world of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. The New York had texture, the warm oranges of the forever setting a rising sun define the look of these two movies. And it just felt right that this Johnny Storm could and would constantly call Tobey's Spider-Man a dork. But yeah, now as a sickly, cynical mid-20-year-old douchebag, I realized that connection would result in something as morally bankrupt as this multiverse hellscape we are living in. Sorry, not sorry, but hey man, say what you will about the sometimes corny, overwritten dialogue that lacks the poeticism of Sam Spidey or the harsh 2000s vibes, but these two movies, they had an emotional punch to them. I mean, tell me another comic book movie that assembles the team together based off a suicide attempt.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
It's telling that Ben Grimm is also sitting on the ledge, nowhere to go, he has just lost his everything. And yet, it's in his nature to look out for his fellow man in a way that the rest of the four haven't really learned yet. I love the practical, tangible, hectic chaos Ben accidentally incites despite just trying to show some empathy.
You wanna be scared? Fine!
I love how the police still instinctively aim their guns at him after he saved countless lives. It's great stuff. I love how despite being cheered on as a hero, being shown public affection despite his appearance, his one who vowed to love him can no longer. And you can't tell me that this doesn't feel raw, that this moment doesn't hit. The best parts of the Tim Story movies are the parts that are too often left on the cutting room floor in most superhero movies. The moments that don't feel the need for forced comedy or exaggerated zany action. The moments that feel truthfully human. And of course that's a subjective statement, but you know what I mean, and you know it when you feel it. There are plenty of those moments across both films.
Wow, Dr. Phil, that's deep.
And I think you'd agree with me that the most human characters in these films are of course Ben and Johnny.
You done good, kid.
The brotherly bond between a narcissistic yet caring asshole blended with the grumpy and all too hurting Thing. It's perfect. You know brothers who act like this and have uncles who you wish were like this. Despite the Flame and the Rock, Evans and Chiklis gave very real performances. They created a tangible dynamic of masqueraded and manifested insecurity you can see. They feel like people you know. They feel like friends. Friends with all too relatable banter and all too relatable pain behind that. I love how at the end of the first film they forced Ben into an evil, sadistic choice. Do I go back to being me, the image of myself in my head that will never fade? Do I allow myself the peace and comfort that would come with that, the love I don't have to work for? Or do I make the selfless choice to save my family, save my city, and forever be judged by how I look, forever be unable to feel human skin, forever feel my beating heart inside a monster?
Look at me. You got no idea what I'd give to be invisible.
I love how that choice kind of carries over into the second film. I love how Johnny and Ben switch roles in a way.
Come on!
The irony of someone who was on fire, the center of attention, craving the affection, someone who was, by all means, the most normal one in the first movie, is turned into the outcast, the loner. Johnny craves intimacy, but his impulses make it nearly impossible for him. It's not just flaming skin that pushes people away. And he's confronted by how normal Ben and Alicia's relationship has become, how much genuine love is there. Ben in movie 2 kind of has the healthiest relationship out of the four. The one who struggled the most with his transformation has accepted his choice, his new life.
Yeah, I'm a lucky guy.
And he's all the more mature for it. Whereas Johnny has to face the fact that being the hot-headed asshole is growing stale. Sometimes you gotta grow up, and his flame begins to flicker. So when he comes into contact with the surfer, his existential crisis is manifested literally. If not the hothead, if not the one on fire, who is he?
Let's not make this about me.
In the end, he makes a similar choice, perhaps learning from his rocky best pal. Johnny makes the sacrifice play, absorbing the team's powers, not knowing what could happen, not knowing if he will charm his way out of this one.
It's clobbering time.
It's always been in Johnny's nature to take a risk, but now he's doing it without ego. It's great stuff, man. And I think First Steps has a lot to live up to when it comes to these lovable goofs. From the casting to the execution to the beating heart felt underneath fire and rock, these renditions of Johnny and Ben were, dare I say,
fantastic.
Here's the thing. I get these films aren't everyone's cup of tea, so I'm not about to tell someone they're wrong for disliking them, because I agree, there's a lot to dislike. For every adaptational change that works, there's another thing that completely flops. But all too frequently, I see both of these films get ranked among the worst this genre has to offer, and I just don't get it. If nothing else, Tim Story's Fantastic Four duology understands that any incarnation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's iconic team, worth its salt, needs to feel like a family, and both Fantastic Four 2005 and Rise of the Silver Surfer clear that bar handily. Are they a one-to-one translation of their comic book counterparts? Nope, but they get the fundamentals mostly right. At their best, they offer an earnest and loving rendition of the characters that forever changed this genre. And at the end of the day, that's why I keep coming back to these movies time and time again. They're pleasant and comfortable. Throwing on either of Story's Fantastic Four films feels like catching up with old friends. The team's dynamic is so familiar, and each actor inhabits their role with heart and conviction. Neither entry is as thrilling or emotionally involved as their peers, but getting to watch these four misfits stand by one another through thick and thin as John Ottman's legendary theme blares behind them is a delight every single time, and it's a shame that simply pleasure has to be obfuscated by so much vitriol. Far be it from me to say we should just quote-unquote let people enjoy things as a means to shut down valid criticism, but surely there's a way to acknowledge that these films aren't perfect without turning a blind eye to all the things they do pretty well. After all, taking the good with the bad is what family is all about.